Imagine a world where everyone feels free to be who they are, wherever they are. A world where we celebrate difference and embrace individuality. Imagine a world where everybody has the same equal rights and equal opportunities. A world where LGBTQ plus people can fulfill their potential and live their lives free from prejudice. At Stonewall, we imagine this world. But the only way we can make this world a reality is together with you. To find out more, just visit stonewall.org.uk.
To open the session, it's over to Chris Oliver, who's our Chief Operating Officer, Deputy Chief Executive, and our exec sponsor of our LGBTQ plus staff network. So over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, Nancy, for joining us today. It's really special to have you here as part of our LGBT History Month. I know we've got some Q&As which will be fascinating, but just, so I had seen on Twitter as well that it's your birthday. So yeah, we are doubly lucky to have you today. And look, you're not working in the NHS because you would have had your birthday off had you been in this trust. So we have really tried to I suppose, really in the whole agenda around inclusion and diversity within the trust, and the team have worked tirelessly on a lot of engagements, and today is just part of that. So a huge thank you to Pav, Becky, and Joe for that. And as I said, thank you for you being here today. And just looking at what you've done, so you've been Chief Exec of Stonewall from June 20. So all the way through the pandemic, and we know the inequality and the impact that's had, and the isolation that's had. Doubled that isolation, I feel, through the pandemic. But you moved there from the National Centre of Social Research, and I'd be keen just to also understand a bit about that as well. That'd be really, really helpful, where you were Deputy Chief Exec. But I think through all your career, you've been a real advocate and champion for LGBT rights, and just a fantastic background. So really looking forward to your discussion today. Thank you very much for joining us.
For question one, we'll perhaps put these in the chat as well. You started your role as the COVID pandemic was tearing through the country. What lessons has the pandemic taught you about yourself, the LGBT plus movement, and standing up for equality in the face of opposition?
So it's a huge question, right? So I'll start with the personal. So I remember about 6 months into the pandemic, I saw a tweet that someone had posted that really stuck with me, and they said something like, "This whole experience is an exercise in understanding that what I used to think was the end of my tether was actually somewhere near the middle of my tether." So like and I think we all have been subject to, at a personal level, just to this incredible traumatic experience. And the audience today, you've been working in an institution at the heart of this like collective trauma. And I think there's upsides to that and there's downsides to that. And the upside is my goodness, it makes you grateful. And grateful for what you do have, and grateful for the resilience you see around you. And the downside is it's awful. It's really awful. So at a personal level, I've learned that what I thought was the end of my tether was the middle of my tether, and that I could keep going. And I'm sure a lot of you learned that. What I've seen in terms of the movement and of the community, actually, I'll talk a bit about both just briefly. So we were talking kind of in the intro, but LGBTQ plus people have dramatically worse mental health than cis and straight people, about twice the level of kind of clinically diagnosable mental health problems in our community. And it's been that way for a really long time. And it's like that throughout the life course. So LGBT kids, much more likely to have problems with their mental health. Our elders, much more likely to, for instance, attempt suicide, right? So mental health is a really huge unaddressed issue in our community. And And then to watch the community go into the pandemic that had these sort of devastating mental health impacts on all of us has been really frightening, actually, because you're starting already from such a difficult place. But at the same time, what you see in the community, in the movement, is just this incredible this passion, this belief, this ability to keep showing up, to keep lifting each other up. And you see it a lot with activists, when people are struggling, you see other people gathering around them, virtually or in person, and lifting them up. And I've benefited a lot from that. It's Linda Riley from Diva, when I got this job, said it's a hot seat, and it's a hot seat being the chief exec of Stonewall. And I've had so much compassion and kindness from activists, grassroots activists in the movement, from individual LGBTQ plus people. So it's just such a bittersweet thing, I think, that I worry so much for our community and what it's been through and what it's still going through. But by the same token, there is just this enormous solidarity and this enormous love that we lift each other up. So that's hugely hopeful for me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nancy. I'm back. Apologies for that technical error. So I liked what you were saying there about, where the community, we've identified new needs in effect within the community that were always there but are now more visible. And you're talking to an audience which is largely NHS health workers or supportive health workers. Can you tell me what you think we as the NHS need to focus on in terms of doing more to be compassionate and inclusive of LGBT communities in the healthcare setting?
So I think, I guess there's a couple of things which I think are about doing the basics well, and then one thing that is kind of more about understanding where people's starting point is. So what I mean by kind of doing the basics well, I think that the kind of work that D&I teams do day in, day out to help workforces be inclusive, recruit a diverse talent pool, make sure that diverse talent pool feels able to bring their whole selves to work. LGBTQ staff are a huge part of this picture. Allies standing up and making sure that it's a truly inclusive workforce are a huge part of this picture, but also the policies, the procedures, the training that make sure that when I rock up at one of your settings, you don't assume that I'm married to a man just because I'm a woman with kids. All of these things, the basics, it can be easy to take them for granted, but they matter enormously. We know that LGBTQ plus people have some quite negative experiences still of interacting with healthcare workers. And that damages trust. And as you know much better than I, where you damage trust, people aren't going to come for the healthcare that they need. And if they come for the healthcare that they need, they're not going to engage positively in a way that leads to the best outcomes. So I think there's a huge piece on the workforce side and on the service delivery side that is about just really investing and loving the basics and valuing them and not seeing them as add-ons and not seeing them as trivial, and things like we're privileged to be part of the NHS Rainbow Badge scheme, things like being able to see people wearing that rainbow badge when you turn up to a health setting is a big part of feeling safe and welcome. And then the other point that I would make, which again kind of links to the mental health point, is understanding where we start. So we're a population, and obviously, as the great Audre Lorde said, we're not single issue, we don't live single issue lives. So, but most LGBTQ plus people, we're part of a population that has some distinctive health needs, the most distinctive of which is around our mental health. And I think there's a tendency, and has historically been a tendency, to think about the distinctive needs of our population in terms of sexual health only. But actually understanding that anytime you're interacting with me, to use an example, you're interacting with someone that's at really elevated risk of having a mental health problem, for instance. That matters a lot. So understanding the kind of demographic drivers of ill health within our community is also really valuable, I think.
That's really helpful. I can certainly identify with the narrative of, I think a lot of gay men, particularly LGBT people plus in general, have been seen through this lens of of sexuality and sex rather than having whole lives. And that I think we've had to pay the price for that. So which brings me next to the next question, Nancy, which is, there are huge challenges. You've obviously been engaged in some of those battles on the front line for us. But what do you think the biggest challenges are facing the LGBT community at the present moment in terms of our rights and either protecting those or advancing those rights, and where do we need to go?
So, I mean, I'll point to some of the kind of areas that we're most actively engaged on at the minute, because our new strategy is designed to try and address some of the big issues that the LGBTQ plus community face. So, we should think here really about the position of trans people in the UK. And that is about rights, but it's also about people's day-to-day experiences, their ability to access healthcare, their ability to be safe in the streets, their ability to be secure at work. And we're living in a moral panic at the minute about trans people. It might not have escaped everybody that hasn't opened a paper recently, but that is a really important area where we need to make progress. The issue that I've been talking about, mental health, is a huge issue, and that cuts across all of our communities. And it's really poorly invested in terms of specialist services, whether that's in the statutory or the community sector. We can think of areas like hate crime. So hate crime is high and is rising across our community at the minute, and that isn't just about reporting. That is about our communities being less safe, and whether that's on the streets or online, that's something we should care about. So we campaign for parity in hate crime legislation, but we also campaign for investment in kind of countering hate so that we can be safe. And then we can think about perhaps a couple of other things, access to kind of fairness in family formation. We've got a campaign at the minute called IVF for All that is about equalising access to fertility services for LGBTQ plus people. And we can think about particular groups. So we work a lot on the needs and rights of LGBTQ plus refugees. So whether that's internationally, we've worked a lot on Afghanistan over the last year, or here in the UK. So how we can make sure that LGBTQ plus refugees can survive and thrive. I could go on forever, but those are some of the priorities that I would see and that we work on very actively every day.
And in the political landscape that we are, and you touched on the trans rights issues, that's been a bit of a hot potato for a while, and you've done a very valiant job in defending those rights, so well done to you. I just wonder, in the political landscape that we've got, how receptive is that landscape to the agenda that you're putting out there?
I think it's complicated. So we tend to think and talk as if the picture is the same across the UK. So the government in Scotland has got an extremely progressive agenda around LGBTQ plus rights, including trans rights. The government in Wales has got an extremely progressive agenda and the ambition to be one of Europe's most LGBT plus friendly countries, right? Westminster is much more mixed. We've got a kind of small c conservative government, and that means that some parts of this agenda get sucked into a kind of culture war. But it also means that you haven't got as strong of a driver of progress, and you can see that. So ILGA, which is the International LGBT Rights Organization, just put out their rankings, their report card for countries around the world and how they do in terms of LGBTQ plus rights. And the UK used to be a leader, and we're stagnating, we're falling down the rankings because as other nations press ahead, we're not making progress. So it feels like we're quite stalled, and at the same time, particularly in England, we're getting sucked into some of this culture war stuff.
Thank you for that, and it's really helpful to remind ourselves that it's a mixed picture across the UK. So just I mean, obviously we're in the NHS and we've got a significant LGBT plus workforce working in the National Health Service, and we're incredibly proud of that. What advice would you give to LGBT plus people and our allies who work with us, who are trying to tackle systemic and sometimes quite ingrained structural inequalities like homophobia in our workplaces? And I know you've got a big program on workforce workplaces. What advice would you give to those of us who are LGBT and our allies?
I'm going to start with allyship, because I think that allyship is a huge part of this picture. So what we know from all of our work with organisations of all kinds through our Diversity Champions programme and through things like Rainbow Badges and all of the work that we've done in this space is that active allyship at all levels within an organisation is completely critical to challenging some of that embedded structural homophobia, biphobia, transphobia that you can have in workplaces. And I think supporting allies and talking about allyship and talking about it as a doing word. People often think of being a good ally as being like, I have right thinking, you know, I think in the right way or I feel in the right way. It doesn't really help thinking or feeling in the right way. It helps that you do things that progress the concerns of LGBTQ plus people, it progress the needs, the thoughts, and the agenda. So I think really thinking about allyship, having really strong senior sponsorship is a huge part of what starts to break down barriers. Sorry, my dogs are going to war with a cat in the background.
We've had it all. We've had it all today, so no problems.
So you get my very loud dog, but. So that's a huge part of the picture. I think networks are the other really key piece here. And I start with allies and senior sponsors because networks cannot do it on their own, and they often are asked to do it on their own or expected to do it on their own. But you know, LGBTQ plus networks that have that support, that have some funding, that are enabled to thrive, that are enabled to direct change and be partners for change within the organisation are transformational. And then maybe the third piece of advice, which is more personal for those of us that the expression is doing your gay job on top of your day job, right? So you have a job and then you kind of spend all of your time doing LGBT inclusion for your organisation on top of this, is that it's okay to step back sometimes. I think people burn themselves out in this work quite frequently. And having trust that kind of if you're at low ebb, you know, there'll be a colleague that can step up for a bit and then you can step back when you've got energy for that work again. It's just kind of recognizing that working around our own identity, whether it's around race, disability, sexuality, gender identity, is hard. It takes energy from us. And we shouldn't feel like we have to carry it all of the time. So kind of trusting in the group, trusting in the community to take it forward, I think is also important over the long term.
So there's a narrative in there around self-care as well as building the allyship and driving the agenda forward.
Yeah, I love that stuff about how self-care is a radical act, right? That, you know, none of us can make change if we're not functional, if we're not okay. I mean, we don't have to every day be our best self. That would be nice, but probably unrealistic. But we have to look after ourselves and each other in order to be able to make change. And I think I meet so often, and I've been that person, I meet so often people that have kind of just driven themselves into the ground trying to create change. And that's bad at an individual level, but also it's not gonna get us there in the end. So we have to sort of hold hands and trust each other a bit more, I think.
Yeah, and I think just thinking about the NHS context and over the last couple of years in particular, I think most colleagues would probably agree that, you know, it's been a really tough ride for us in the NHS. It's sort of been this never-ending onslaught of work, and there's always more, and that happens all the time anyway, but it's been particularly difficult and challenging in the last 2 years, and I think we're seeing the effects of that in terms of engagement or people's, you know, there's a degree of compassion fatigue sometimes that sets in. And we know there's a clear correlation. Lots of research in the NHS showing that when staff are exhausted or not engaged or not present and they're, you know, tired, it has a direct impact patient care and quality of care. So I think the self-compassion and self-care piece is so absolutely critical, both in workplace but also in terms of fighting for our rights. So Nancy, I just want to move you on to our fifth question, which is around the work of Stonewall. And we know that you do really fantastic work here at home in the United Kingdom, across all 4 countries here in the UK, but you're also doing some really incredible work overseas. And I don't know if that's a relatively recent development, but it feels that you're more pronounced more recently in your international work. And I just wanted to ask the question, really, what does that international and home work on LGBT rights teach us about solidarity and protecting the most marginalised in our communities, both here and overseas? What's that taught you in the organisation?
So I think a couple of things come to mind. Firstly, there is something very emotional for me about this, and it's this idea of chosen family. I'm old enough, it's my birthday today, I'm 49. I'm old enough to have grown up with chosen family being at the core of my identity as a lesbian. And I think family is family wherever they are in the world. Like, I feel connection, I feel love, I feel a kind of reciprocal link to LGBTQ plus people everywhere, because we have lots of differences, but some really core shared experiences and some really core shared parts of our identity. And that solidarity, that feeling of connection and solidarity, runs through all of our work. I think the other thing that is really present in our international work is about kind of respect. So we work with what are called the Amsterdam Principles. So when we work in another country, we work on alongside the civil rights activists in that country, and we work to help them achieve their agenda. We don't kind of parachute in and say, "Hi, we're Stonewall. We've come to fix everything." And sometimes that's really hard. Sometimes you see something happening in a country and you think, I want to sort of plow in and make my voice heard, but actually activists on the ground, organizations on the ground are saying that's not the help we need. And so I think that that's a really, really important learning in terms of not being colonialist, not being patronizing, in really standing as part of a movement. And so our work ranges from behind the scenes support to NGOs that you would never see, to shared programs. Say we have a shared program now in 5 countries that is about reporting hate crime anonymously and training judiciary and police, where we're supporting those activists to do that work in their national contexts, to times where we really do need to step in and it's only us that can do it. So we were able to support a cohort of 60 LGBTQ plus Afghans and their families to come and resettle in the UK in the wake of the troop withdrawal. And so that's a kind of a constant learning, I think, this learning about what is our place in the movement and what can we offer, and doing that with a sense of humility.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nancy. That's really helpful. And I like this concept of allowing people safe spaces in which to self-organize, work out what their own priorities are, and maybe even shape their own strategy, and then invite you in to support them in furthering that agenda. And I think, the work what we've done outside of here at UK Black Pride, Stonewall, etc., is lends to that sort of that principle. And I think it's a really important one. So thank you. And also fantastic work that you did on the Afghan evacuation for those 60 families, which I think is really, really important. Just on that, Nancy, if I can just ask for an update, what's happening to those who are left behind? Because obviously there's not just 60 LGBT plus Afghans in that country. Any news on what else is going on there?
Sure. I mean, so I can tell you about the work that we're doing. So, but also just to say, so the situation of LGBTQ plus Afghans is dire. Afghanistan is not safer than it was. It is just as profoundly unsafe. And we're doing work on a number of fronts. So firstly, we're working with UK government and development agencies, who are the only people on the ground, to really push them to think about how they can get support to LGBTQ Afghan people who will mostly stay in Afghanistan for obvious reasons. And we're working with ILGA Asia, which is the LGBT organisation in the region, to basically create a safe caseload holding system so that people who are leaving, who are fleeing persecution, don't have to travel with completely unsafe documentation and evidence of who they are and those sorts of things. And we're hoping to work with other countries, including the US, to support more people to leave and resettle through that partnership. And we've been doing work with a fantastic specialist organisation called Protection Approaches around helping governments to do atrocity prevention work in Afghanistan. But over the longer term, the real issue here is we have a refugee protection system that doesn't work for LGBT people. So whether that's talking to the UN, so UNHCR, about its guidelines, or working with Rainbow Migration to lobby on the Nationality and Borders Bill right here in the UK, which makes things much worse for LGBT refugees. We're doing kind of longer term work that is about trying to make much safer pathways for all LGBTQ refugees in the future.
It's really good. Well done. And it's great to see that they're joining the dots between policy and practice and how that's a cyclical business. So fantastic. So last question for me, Nancy, and that is, what can we expect to see from Stonewall in the year ahead? What's next for you, for the organisation?
So we're right in the middle of a campaign on conversion therapy ban. Hopefully you've all seen that and engaged with it and responded to government consultation. So we'll be doing a lot of work to try and make sure that there is an effective legislative ban on conversion therapy. We'll be pushing forward with our new campaign on access to IVF. So you'll see that. In Scotland, we'll be working on Gender Recognition Act reform. That's one of the things that's going through from that perspective. Tomorrow, you're going to see the new winners of the Workplace Equality Index announced. I have to not talk about that in case I accidentally tell you, what place everybody came. So we'll be doing lots more work on workplace inclusion and kind of supporting people to bring their whole selves to work. And we're planning a whole kind of sequence of activities and events around Pride 50. So this year is, as probably everybody knows, the 50th anniversary of the first Pride March in England. I have to say this, there was one in Scotland earlier, and there'll be a huge programme of events celebrating our community, and we're going to be doing a lot of work as part of that and encouraging people to stand with us as a community and create a world where all LGBTQ plus people can be safe and can thrive.
That's fantastic. That's really, really great. So Nancy, look, on behalf of my colleagues, and this is a collective effort from those of our NHS trusts in Lancashire and South Cumbria. That's North West Ambulance Service, that's the University Hospitals, Morecambe Bay Trust, Lancashire Teaching Hospitals, Blackpool Teaching Hospitals, East Lancashire Teaching Hospitals, and our own Lancashire South Cumbria Foundation Trust. We're genuinely pleased to have had you here. I'm going to hand you back to Jo, who's our brilliant LGBT lead here at the Trust, and thank you for the work that you've done. I look forward to working with you some more. You're absolutely amazing, and we're really honoured that you're here with us. So thank you. Jo, over to you.
Thanks, Pav. So we have some pre-submitted questions from our staff network members and equality, diversity and inclusion champions. One of them you've already answered, so I think we'll have a little bit of time afterwards if anyone wants to add any questions, put them in the chat, or there might be time to ask in person at the end. Okay, so we'll move on to this one from Lizzie Simpkin, who's our LGBTQ network member. What do the police need to do? What do the police need to do to rebuild trust, given the Stephen Port murder killing spree of at least 4 gay men and failures in police investigation?
So it's a really important question. So for anybody on the call that isn't aware, Stephen Port was a serial killer who killed 4 young gay men, actually quite close to where I live, in East London. And very recently, the inquest reported into their deaths and found that the Metropolitan Police had really profound failings in how they'd investigated the case. So profound that if they had done their job properly, effectively, some of those young men would not have died. And what it points to, I think, for the Met is something that's actually quite familiar to the community, which is that the police don't always do a great job of working with LGBT people, of listening to LGBT people, or of keeping us safe. So I think there's some learning that is specific for the Met. I think there absolutely has to be an independent inquiry into institutionalized homophobia, biphobia, transphobia in the Met. There needs to be an inquiry into misogyny in the Met. I mean, for those of you that have kind of seen, there have been a number of stories about institutional cultural problems within the Metropolitan Police, of which this is a really important facet. So there is a specific piece of work that has to happen for the Metropolitan Police to rebuild trust. But I do think that there are learnings there for wider forces. And this is about really working with the community, really doing the work to challenge homophobia, biphobia and transphobia on what can be quite a macho working environment, and working alongside community groups and community leaders locally to make sure that policing is responsive to the needs of LGBTQ plus people. But as I've said, I think there is a very specific need for an independent inquiry into the Met because the failings are so profound on so many different equalities issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Nancy. So a question from Jessica Payne from Morecambe Bay. Can you tell us about the Diversity Champions programme? And there's been some negative press attention recently. And how does this influence the work we do in the NHS? So there's kind of three questions there, actually.
Okay, I'll have a go at all three. So the Diversity Champions programme is a programme we've run at Stonewall for over 15 years to support organisations of all kinds, public sector, private sector, voluntary sector, to create inclusive working environments so that LGBTQ plus people can bring our whole selves to work and can thrive and contribute. And we have around 900 diversity champions right now. It's a really big program. And over the time we've been running the program, we've seen just a transformation in workplace inclusion. So it's work that we're incredibly passionate about. We did through last year have a lot of bad press about the program, and the press is all to do with the fact that we're a trans inclusive organisation and the program is trans inclusive. So it's probably the most visible version of this that you might see, but other trans inclusive organisations have been attacked in the press in a similar way. So Diversity Role Models, for instance, which is just a lovely kind of schools inclusion charity, or TIE in Scotland, which is a school inclusion charity, have also been attacked in the press, and it's because they're trans inclusive. And I think, yeah, I mean, that is the reason. And we're not going to change that. You know, that we're not going to stop standing with our trans siblings. We're not going to stop saying that trans people should be safe to bring their whole selves to work. And we're not going to kind of push trans people out of our community. So that's kind of where the coverage came from. And at a factual level, what happened is around 900 Freedom of Information Act requests were put in to everybody that worked with Stonewall in a 2-month period. So we spent a lot of time dealing with FOIs, and then the organisations that put them in gave them to the press and kind of found kind of tiny bits of nonsense that they could make stories about. So even for a public authority, I think people are usually impressed when I say 900 Freedom of Information Act requests in a couple of months. I think there's a couple of things that it's done. I mean, it was incredibly hard for the organisation and incredibly hard for our partners, actually. We did a lot of work to support partners around what was going on and being able to kind of explain what was going on within their organisation, and we still have to do that work. But it also was hugely confirmatory of the value and the importance of the work. So as you would expect, we did a big technical review to make sure that everything we were saying was correct, big legal review. and it was. And so that was really kind of reinforcing of the quality of the work. And we did lots of work to support the team and to give them additional training, to give them confidence. And so it's been very difficult in lots of ways, but also has had some positive impacts in terms of just really reinforcing the value of the work and the importance of doing that work well. Although I hope we have a different time in the press this year.
Thank you. Yes, I think you answered that really, really well. The fact that there was negative publicity, maybe some backlash, actually shows the need and the reasons that you need to that everyone needs to be part of these programs and part of this work, the importance of it. Okay, so a question from Kevin McVie. He's a EDNR champion, network co-chair up in Kendal. How effective was the Rainbow Laces campaign, and do you have plans to expand it?
There we go. So I love that you asked about Rainbow Laces. So Rainbow Laces is our LGBT inclusion in sports campaign that we run every year. And it grows every year. So even though this year, because of the pandemic, Rainbow Laces typically has these really flashy events where kind of football stadiums will make themselves rainbow coloured and give away lots of shoelaces and things, rainbow laces and things like that. Even though we've had 2 years now of Rainbow Laces being not exclusively but primarily digital, it's grown and grown, and we measure its impact. So the focus of this year's Rainbow Laces was really about allyship. It was about Lace Up, Speak Out, the idea that everybody, whether you're participating in sports directly or you're a fan, feels confident to stand up to homophobia and biphobia and transphobia. And we did pre and post surveys, and what we can see from that is at the end of this year's most recent Rainbow Laces campaign, and people felt more confident in how to challenge homophobia and biphobia and transphobia within sport. So it's a fantastically successful campaign that grows and grows. It spreads across sports. We had loads of great work from I'm a rugby coach, so I'm going to be partial here, but the RFU did great videos, and tennis got really involved, and football has always been a huge supporter. So it's a fantastic campaign, and it's not just, sometimes when people think about inclusion in sport, they think about, elite sport, they think about the first gay footballer, or all of these sorts of things. But this is about grassroots sport. It's about the fact that I teach rugby minis with my rainbow laces on, and that we all feel able to kind of kick a ball around on a Saturday. And it's a part of our work we're so passionate about, and we're just starting to take it internationally. So we're just starting to do some work in the US most recently on Rainbow Laces. So
yeah, thank you. It's reminded me of there was a football tournament a couple of years ago in the summer amongst our service users, and I think service users from other organisations as well. And it was a really successful day. But our teams were wearing rainbow laces, and it was fabulous. It was a brilliant day. Okay, so Kevin has got his rainbow Converse on today. He wants to share that. Any questions in the chat? Kieran has asked, is put that it is noted that local football team Burnley have changed background on logos to rainbow flag, which is fabulous. Is further work being done to tackle homophobia in football?
Yeah, so we've worked for a really long time with football. So we work with the FA, we work with the Premier League, and they do a lot of work that is, some of which is quite visible, all of the kind of the rainbows on everything, but some of which isn't. So we do a lot of training, for instance, in football academies with the young people coming up. We've done work specifically with captains groups, because they provide like leadership, the sort of player care part of the picture. So players do feel more confident around these issues and potentially coming out. And we do quite a lot of work in grassroots football. And I think there's a real, my kind of perception is that football is a sport in which there is a genuine acknowledgement at the club level and then all the way up that homophobia in particular, and biphobia directed towards by men, is still quite a significant issue in the sport, and there's a real willingness and desire to tackle it. And you'll have seen more and more kind of Premiership players speaking out against homophobia within the sport. But I think the change comes slowly, and whenever you look and you see these positive statements, you will see comment after comment after comment after comment from fans saying that what's this, we know this has got no place in sports. I think we've still got quite a long way to go. I'm probably most excited about the work that we and others do in the academies. So the whole new generation of players is growing up kind of equipped with a more inclusive attitude.
Thank you. So we've got a question from Becky. I wonder if you could share a bit about the work you do with schools and colleges, please.
I'd love to. I love it when people let me talk about all the fantastic work. So we have a School Champions programme, which is a bit like Diversity Champions, but it works with schools and colleges and FE settings to help them create whole school environments where LGBT children are safe and can learn. So we don't work directly in classrooms with children. We train teachers. We train, we support whole school approaches. We do anti-bullying training for teachers so that they know how to tackle homophobic, biphobic and transphobic bullying. We do awareness training with teachers, and we do kind of bespoke consultancy work where schools are having a hard time, and really what you will sometimes find is schools have quite entrenched problems around homophobia and biphobia and transphobia, and they need like a bit of additional help. So we've got a kind of, that's all of the day in, day out schools work we do. But we also do work with local authorities to support them in their children and young people's work. We run a young campaigners programme to support the next generation of LGBTQ plus young campaigners. And we've got a whole programme of work that is about LGBT youth that are not in education or employment and training. So we've got some really fantastic schools work that is about making sure children can be safe and can learn at school. But we've also got a kind of wider set of work that is around LGBT youth and making sure that the next generation can survive, can thrive, and can change the world, right?
Yeah, really great to hear about all the work that you're doing in schools and colleges. So different to when I was at school in the 80s and 90s, totally different times. So question from Chris about staff networks. So we do have an LGBTQ plus staff network at our trust. We've had it now for about 18 months. And Chris is asking that, saying staff networks start off slowly. Any tips to gain greater awareness, attendance across allies and the community?
That's a great question. So one of the things that I think is quite consistent is having, across different organisations, is the importance of having a kind of enthusiastic senior sponsor that talks about your network a lot. So it's not just you talking about your network, it's your senior leadership talking about your network, and or your D&I leads talking about it. And there is a kind of permeating throughout the organisation of the idea, not only does the network exist, but it's valued and it's at the heart of our community. It's the heart of how we work. So I think getting all of that kind of allyship moving is really important. I think events like LGBT History Month, periods of time like LGBT History Month, are really, really important. And creating spaces that invite people in to learn as part of those events. And so obviously you're doing lots of stuff for LGBT History Month. Pride 50 is a great opportunity to think about history and now, but also all year round there are going to be great opportunities to kind of invite people in, or to showcase opportunities for people to kind of engage and educate themselves. So I think that is really, really important. And then I think coming back to kind of self-care and compassion, like it's okay if it takes a while, and it's okay if it builds slowly, and it's very natural. So I nearly told you who came top in the top 100 employers there. The organization who is the top 100 employer, the person who started the LGBT network group there like 15 years ago is just about to leave, and they've just been named number one. They're about to be named tomorrow number one. And listening to them talk about that process of evolution from being in an organization where it was kind of them and their two friends, to being in an organization that really is doing outstanding work across the board in LGBT inclusion, really helps you appreciate, I guess, that kind of idea of little seeds. And a new network is just as you're planting a seed. So you nurture it, you water it, but it's going to be a tree, and it's going to be a tree much sooner probably than you think it.
Thank you. That's a fabulous answer, and I think very reassuring as well for our staff network, which is it's building all the time, but it can be quite slow. But we also have got a brilliant exec sponsor in Chris, which is great, very visible exec sponsor. So we're very fortunate. So we've got a question from Matt. Wishes you happy birthday, and is just wondering how best to support trans friends, colleagues in an everyday setting. It's especially noticed rising negativity in the media and changes in attitudes from those close to me. I'm wondering how to make rights go forward rather than back.
So I think it comes back to this point about allyship being a doing word, right? And the most important thing, I think, with the context you're describing is to be clear to the trans people in your life that you know and care about, that you see what's happening and that you care, and that you want to talk about it if they want to talk about it, and if they want to talk about the fantastic pottery program that was on last night, then you're there to talk about that too. Because I think sometimes when things are really hard, we can make an assumption that everybody wants to talk about it, and some people really do, and some people would rather distract themselves, but everybody wants to know that you're there for them. So I think that's really, really important, showing love and respect and to the trans people in your life, whether that's at work or at home, and being clear that you're here for that conversation and you're here for them. And the second thing, I think, is this is a time when cis people really need to speak up. So we have a situation where there's a minority, and it is a minority of people who feel very threatened, sometimes very negatively, directly towards trans people, and are talking about it all the time. And for all sorts of reasons that I won't go into, that gets a lot of traction in the press. And because it's so nasty, most people step back. So actually, on a day-to-day level, as a cis person, saying, I'm not okay with the thing that you just said, I feel like it was quite prejudiced, or I'm not okay with the thing you just did, and I feel like it was unfair. Or even just saying, I don't feel the way that you do, I don't agree with the thing you just said, matters enormously, because there is a silent majority of cis people who just want trans people to be able to live their lives, and they see the way that trans rights and trans lives get spoken about, and they see that it feels really complex and really mean, and people are horrible to each other on Twitter all the time, and they kind of shrink back from it. And there are so cisgender, it means somebody whose gender identity is the same as their sex. So like me, it's the opposite of transgender. Sorry. So I think it's a time when we all need to speak up for decency. You don't have to get into a fight on Twitter, but but we have to stand up and stand in allyship with trans people. If we want trans people to be and feel safe, we have to say so. It's a tiny population. It's less than 1% of the population is trans, right? And they need us to stand with them. So we've all got a part to play in that.
Thank you. So I think we might need to make this our last question. So this is from Sule from I want to say UCLan, University of Central Lancashire. Sule's asking, can Nancy give us an update about the advocacy work in relation to the criticism to EHRC and how doubtful is their role in advancing LGBTQ inclusion? Where are we with the work and the government response so far?
So the Equality and Human Rights Commission is the UK's independent human rights body, and for a long time it hasn't done anything on LGBTQ plus rights. And in fact, the sector wrote to it over a year ago saying, you're not doing anything, could you help, please? And recently it started intervening, but it started intervening to hold back trans people's rights. And this is extraordinary for a human rights body. So we have written to the United Nations body that oversees them to say, we think they're not acting in conformance with the relevant international law. With 20 other LGBT organisations, we've written to them. And that process is a slow process. There'll be a review. We know they'll get criticised for their independence because they always have been. But the failings that they're showing are really profound. In fact, there's another article coming out today about more of it. And it matters. I mean, they've been criticised around not taking action on Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. They've been criticised about not taking action around disability justice, on race, etc. They're quite a weak institution, and we need a human rights institution that's strong and that's confident and that is really progressing and defending the rights of all citizens. That's what independent human rights institutions do. So it's a really sad thing to do, to have to sort of criticize publicly a human rights institution, but it is an extreme position we found ourselves in. And I think there's such a concern internationally about where Britain is at the minute on trans rights in particular, that the only thing in a sense we can do is say to other human rights bodies, you have to kind of bring them into line with international best practice, that there are no other kind of vehicles for us to make that change.
Thank you. So we'll make that our last question. Just to say thank you so much for joining us today, Nancy. It's been a brilliant session. I've learnt lots. I really have. It's fabulous to have had you here.